It is 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm here in my hotel room in Tempe, Arizona. I just woke up. I'm here with my New York dealer, Cheryl, to oversee the installation of 4 large paintings I was commissioned to make by a company called Drive Time to be installed in their beautiful new corporate headquarters here in Tempe. And as you've probably noticed, I suffer from obstructive sleep apnea. It's a sleep disorder in which the soft tissue in the back of my throat would collapse while I was asleep, and I would stop breathing. And then my heart would shock itself awake with adrenaline in order to make me breathe, which is very dangerous for my heart over a long period of time, not to mention just lousy quality of sleep. So now every night for the rest of my life, I have to wear a CPAP machine. I'll show it to you. That's my CPAP. It's essentially a fat guy breathing machine, which allows me to get the deep restorative sleep that I need to function, to be healthy. And I often talk about one of the duties of a painter is to take the best care we can of our health in order that we can continue to do this thing that we do. So I'm going to take you on a little step-by-step of the commission process. It's been one of the most exciting things I've ever done. I'm going to show you the creation of the paintings in my studio in New York City, then their transfer across the country, and finally their installation here in Tempe, Arizona. And I think the first thing I should do is put on my pants. Like any professional business transaction, a commission begins with a sit-down meeting. And if you're an artist, if you work in show business, you have or will have such meetings, whether it's to discuss an exhibition or scheduling or whatever it is. It's important for an artist to perfect the skill of being in a meeting. And these are all very self-evident, very obvious things that we all learned in kindergarten. Things as basic as don't hit each other, always flush, and wash your hands. But when an artist sits down in a meeting, there are some things to remember. The most important thing is punctuality. Show up on time. Dress impeccably. Dress like the professional that's going to still be doing this in 30 years. Act and behave like someone they want to work with. Make yourself easy to work with. Speak clearly and unpretentiously. No artsy-fartsy gobbledygook. It doesn't impress anyone. And most importantly is when you leave the meeting, go back to your home or to your studio and write a handwritten thank you note on fine cardstock. It's a classy thing to do, and not enough people do that anymore, especially artists. After every transaction I have, every interview, every review, I always write a handwritten thank you note. It says a lot. I worked in art galleries here in New York City in the late 80s and early 90s, and I witnessed egregious behavior by artists who shot themselves in the foot before they even got started simply because they could not conduct themselves in a meeting. I witnessed many painters come in 20 minutes late, dressed like Count Chocula, and then sit hunched over in a chair, staring at the ceiling, complaining. Everybody hates complaining. Don't complain. And they never got anywhere. They didn't impress anyone. In my experience, there are 2 types of angry artists. There are the mentally ill on one side, and then there are the ones that think that by displaying their suffering, it somehow makes them more real. It doesn't impress anyone. Everyone suffers, everyone has misery and sorrow and triumph. Don't waste that by displaying it. Put it where it counts in the work. Every single experience I have, everything I feel gets sublimated and compressed and put where it really counts in the work. All that should be left over at the end of the day when you leave your studio is just the shell, the tired carcass of a person, because everything goes into the work. I am basically a pudgy golf pro. There's nothing left after I leave my studio. I began this commission on April 15th, 2015. And although my main studio is in Manhattan in the Flatiron District, I rent a second, much larger space with 18-foot ceilings in Long Island City, Queens, for these big paintings. And all of the big stretchers are custom made for me by Primary Art Services in New York City. And these are very heavy-duty stretchers with double oil-primed Belgian linen, very heavy-tooth linen. And it took a whole crew of guys to get these up and ready for me to paint. And all of these stretchers are foldable. See those metal plates in the back? They come off, allowing you to wet fold the painting for transportation purposes. And I think when they filmed this, I was already out scoping restaurants. Queens has really good food, and I love Thai food. This was the ideal commission in every sense because the only stipulation was size. They had very specific sizes they wanted. Other than that, I could paint anything I wanted. For lighting, I use the standard silver cans with 100-watt flood bulbs. I like the consistency of light from the studio to the gallery, the same light. I do not like natural light. I had a choice, either send my kids to college or buy paint. I chose to buy paint. I use mostly Gamblin, Old Holland, and Utrecht brand pigments. I brought some of my very oldest and most dependable brushes, some of them going all the way back to high school. For thinner, I use Gamblin's Gamsol. It's an odorless solvent. Oil paint is luminous mud. I like that the painting relates to the way that things work in the real world. And I grew up in the marshes of South Carolina playing in mud. So that's the way that I understand the texture and the consistency and the viscosity of oil paint. Always with that footprint of standing in mud. And man, is it fun to play with. For this 9x10 foot painting, I'm adding a wash of cadmium yellow medium mixed with diaxazine purple to dull it, using only Gamsol as thinner. And I have no idea what I'm going to paint. I've done this for 40 years. The ideas arise in the work itself. I don't start with an idea. But you can see in this landscape image, I begin with a discernible bottom, middle, and top. The bottom relating to the area around your feet, the middle to your gut, and the area at the top corresponding to your head. Here I'm just mixing cobalt blue pure with titanium white, moving in value from darker on the right side to lighter on the left. Thinking a bit about Corot's Italian landscapes, the way he would bend the color blue across the top of the sky. Here I'm using sticks and dowels to carve tree-like movements into the top half of the picture, creating kind of a division and subdivision of pictorial space and creating a sense of rhythm and movement. I'm always playing something as I work. It might be podcasts or talk radio or music. It doesn't matter. It becomes electronic wallpaper for me. In this case, I was listening to old Tiny Tim interviews with Howard Stern. Two of my paintings are 20 feet tall by 6 feet wide, and the interesting challenge in that extreme scale is to make a tall, skinny image feel fatter than it actually is. And to do that, I studied a number of art historical references, including a visit to the Pierpont Morgan Library here in New York, to look at two tall, skinny panels by Hans Memling, who has a very distinctive background space, then a middle ground figure, and then stacked on top of that at the bottom, a foreground figure, behind which there are a subtle series of diagonals, kind of like a pinball machine, which slow the eye down as it moves up and down through the arrangement of figures. And I use that pinball analogy in my own work all the time to make tall vertical paintings feel wider than they are and more elastic. I also looked at French and English cabinetry, noting how the bottom had drawers that pull out towards you and the top shelves that move back away from you. I also looked at the photographs of Diane Arbus, specifically the Jewish giant, which underscores the notion of a landscape image as having an area at the bottom that corresponds to your feet, the middle to the midriff, and the top referring to the area around your head. So that by studying art history, one can learn the tricks is essentially what they are, of how an artist can manipulate scale. And scale referring to the relationship of the objects in the image itself, and also how the viewer, the solitary viewer, relates to the painting as an object. This is braised chicken with spaghetti and meat sauce, yellow rice, and red beans. I'm mixing sap green with Gamblin's Portland Gray Warm, which is kind of a dusty purple pink. And together it makes the color of salad, and it's really beautiful and desert-like. Since these paintings are going to the desert, I'm thinking about some of the painters from the 1950s, the abstract classicists, who worked mainly in Southern California. Painters like Frederick Hammersley and Carl Benjamin, who would use beautiful hues of raspberry, apricot, and sage green to give the light and the clarity of the desert to their pictures. In South Carolina, we have either light or heavy tomato-based barbecue sauce, mustard, or vinegar. This is heavy tomato base. Here I'm mixing yellow ochre with a bit of alizarin crimson. It gets kind of an earthy clay color. And I think it's important in a very large-scale painting to reverse scale and to work on it with very small brushes, very tiny, intimate marks, sort of overwhelmed by the vastness of that gigantic picture plane. It brings the whole thing down to kind of a human touch. This is the exterior of the building, and I think the architect did a really good job combining stone and glass, steel and concrete into one integrated environment that really is open, airy, and brings the outside desert inside. This is my painting Southlight, 9 feet tall by 10 feet wide, which is in the entranceway across from main reception. And I really tried to bring the outside in, also with a touch of South Carolina humidity in the middle of the desert. And 2 crews were responsible for the installation. One from New York City, who brought the paintings across the country in a dedicated semi-air-conditioned truck. They met with a crew from Phoenix, and they took a whole host of equipment, from cherry pickers to cranes and pulleys, to install the 4 paintings. 2 of the tall 20-foot paintings graced or flanked 2 staircases at opposite ends of the building, and I really tried to get the movement in the painting to go from lower to upper. For frames, we used a very simple, elegant wooden frame, which is kind of espresso bean colored, which really protects the edges of the canvas. I think if I had a real job, I would work here. When I'm out west, I always celebrate with In-N-Out Burger, my favorite hamburger. And then we had a sit-down champagne dinner that evening with our host and his lovely wife and some friends. I'm a pretty lucky guy.